Welcome back to the LinkedIn clone. In this video we'll be implementing the beginnings of the chat functionality for our project. So as we can see, we're logged in as two separate users, and if I go ahead and I type something in and I click the send message button, both clients receive the WebSocket communication from the server. And if we go ahead and we respond, we can see that we can start to have the beginnings of a chat application here. So we're going to obviously extend it past this, but it's good to just set things up. So let's go ahead and get started. And if we take a quick look at the NestJS documentation here, we're navigated to the gateways page. And gateways, they're just a way to, it makes it compatible for the WebSocket connection to exist between the client and the server. And out of the box, it comes with SocketIO and WS. So we're going to use SocketIO. So we'll just go ahead and start to install a few packages. So if we open up our project here and we cd into our API folder, we can start to download a few packages here, and it's actually just recommended on this gateways documentation here. So there's the NestJS WebSockets and the platform for SocketIO, and we'll also need SocketIO because that's the WebSocket we're going to be using. So let's just come here and we can just say npm install at NestJS /WebSockets, and of course you could just copy it as well. I'm also going to get at NestJS platform -socket.io, and that's just going to be the wrapper and the Nest implementation for the SocketIO, which we'll also use. So let's go ahead and get that. And let's just open our package.json just to make sure things are being installing. So we'll just wait for that to load and we'll check our packages. So we see that WebSockets just got updated there, SocketIO, and also the platform socket.io. So that's exactly what we would expect. So what we want to do is we want to create a new module for this testing portion of the application. The chatting portion. So we can just use the Nest CLI here, and we'll just go ahead and we'll run a nest g for generate module, and we'll just call this chat. So let's just go ahead and get that here, and that should just add it to the at module. The chat module's there, and our chat module itself, it's pretty bare at the moment, but it's just going to have the class with the decorator from TypeScript. So let's go ahead and close this package.json up. Now we're going to need the gateway, so let's also get that with the Nest CLI with a nest GA, short for gateway. And in this chat module that we just created, we'll create a folder called gateway, and we'll just call it chat. And we don't want any spec files, so we'll just go --no -spec. And let's see what that's given us. So it's added it to the chat module for us, for one thing. And if we open it up, we get this class here, and it has this WebSocket gateway annotation, and it comes with this subscribe message, and it also comes with this handle message. So what we're going to need to do is we can't really work on this in isolation. We need to work with the Nest and the Angular in conjunction with one another due to the server client communication. So I know I've tried to separate the videos as best I can, but this is one of the videos where it really relies on one another. So if you're not doing Angular and you're just following along with a Nest, you just need to, we're just using SocketIO on the front end, so you just need to figure out how to do that, which is going to be pretty much the same thing, just in whatever front end you're using. So in another terminal here, I'm just going to cd into the LinkedIn front end project, and I'm going to run a npm install, and Angular has its wrapper for the SocketIO called ngx-socket-io. So we'll go ahead and we'll install that, and while that's installing, we'll just take a quick look here at what we're expecting. So basically, in the npm documentation here, you can go ahead and you can, configure the SocketIO module and configuration, and you can do this wherever you want, in the app module or maybe the chat module or wherever you're putting it, and you can just go ahead and you can just type in the endpoint for the application, the base. So let's go ahead and get this set up. So we're going to have to create a few things here, because in its current state we don't actually have the chat route set up or anything like that. So we want to be able to navigate to the chat page, and then we want to set up our socket connection there. So I'm just going to start off by adding a module. So if we just take a look at our structure here before we create it, ideally what you would probably want to do is have another module here for the chat module. But the way I've set things up, it's just going to be easier if I do it within this home module, mainly because we want to use the navigation bar in the same in two spots. So if we were to have a chat module, we'd need to have the navigation bar in there, and then since we're using the navigation bar in two different modules, it would probably be best if we created another module for the shared module and put it in there and referenced it like that. That's just an exercise in refactoring, and I just wanted to focus more on the more exciting things. So I'm sure if you wanted to do that, you could do that. I'm just going to go ahead and put it in the home module, nested in there. But again, you can do this however you want. I really just wanted to focus on the WebSocket connection though, and not worry about too much setup for that. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to use the Ionic CLI, and I'm just going to generate a component. So we're in the LinkedIn project, so we can run an Ionic generate C, and in the home folder I'm going to put this in the components, and in the components I'm going to have a chat component. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete the spec file there, because we've set up testing previously. I wouldn't want it to interfere, although it just passes by default. So now that we've got that, we just need to ensure that it actually is in the home module. I know the Angular CLI does this by default, but oftentimes the Ionic doesn't do that by default. So we can just go ahead and get that chat component and just go ahead and get that in there. So then we'll have access to things like the for loops, ng-fors and async pipes and stuff like that. And obviously that's just how you do it anyway. So we've got that set up there. Now let's open our chat module up, and actually let's start by opening our header module up and then making sure our routing's correct. So for that, I'm going to need to look into the this is the API folder. I'm going to need to go into the front end project and open up the home routing module here, and then I'm just going to go ahead and just highlight this here and do a Shift-Alt down, and rather than ID here, a dynamic ID, I'm just going to hit the endpoint, so we're in /home/chat/connections. So that'll be the route, and then we'll just want to use that chat component that we just created. So we'll be able to do that there. And if we run an Ionic serve, we should get the beginnings of our application here. So if I just open up the chat component, let's see, chat component here. Now I'm just going to add some style equal to margin auto, so that's the left and right, be centered, and then some margin top of 110 pixels. Now the reason I've got that is because the way I've set things up, I didn't actually use an iron content where the router is going to route out things. So we need to skip the space of the navigation bar here. So we can see we've got some sort of errors going on here, and that's because we haven't started the server. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll run an npm run start dev. And let's just go ahead and add a picture here. These are erroring because I deleted the pointers to the image, but we're not too concerned about that. So what we want is we want the ability to click on home and this icon here and messaging, and then we want that to route us to the appropriate spots. So we're going to need to open up our header for that. So let's do that. Let's just go ahead and save that. So if I open up the header component, we can go to the LinkedIn logo, and we can just do this on the button. So we'll just add a style here of cursor to pointer, and then we'll go ahead and we'll use the router link, and we'll just set that equal to the /home. So they'll go to localhost 3000 or whatever if it's hosted, /home, like as an absolute path. And let's just go ahead and copy this because we'll use this in a couple other places. Right now it's already on the home page, but I'm imagining we're navigated on the messaging tab, and then we need to go back either by clicking the home button or this button here. So let's go ahead and just add that down a little bit to the iron coal for the home here. So that's that. And then we also want one on the message, so we can go get that. On that iron coal here. But rather than go to /home, we want to go to the absolute path of, well, it is nested in home, but also /chat/connections. /connections. And again, if you wanted to have it in your own module, that probably would be the better approach, but you know, that's quite simple to do, and if you made it this far in the video series, there'll be no problem for you. So that's that, and let's just check if there's anything else. And we probably want just to have a cursor on this drop down here. So let's just go ahead and get that. We can just copy this part now, the styling, and scroll down, and on the iron coal we can just go ahead and add the cursor pointer here, and then that's just going to do some reformatting for us. Prettier. So let's see if this works. We click on messages and it takes us to the component, keeps the navigation bar the same, and of course we can click home and we can click the LinkedIn logo to navigate. So all we've done is we just set up the grounding for us to implement our SocketIO connections. So now we're in a position to be able to actually get the chat application going. So I'm going to just do a Control-C on my Angular Ionic server, so I can use the Ionic CLI here, and I'm just going to generate a service, and where I'm going to put it is in the home folder in the services folder. And of course, if you had a chat folder or a module, you could just put in the services in there. So I'm just going to run an Ionic GS home /services/chat. So let's get that. Let's just go ahead and delete that spec file once again. Okay. So in the app module, in the Angular project, this is where we can go to the ngx-SocketIO and configure our connection. So we'll see that there is the configuration, which is just referencing the endpoint, and then there's also this SocketIO for root with the config, and we'll probably come back and refactor this, but let's just start off with this. So just up the top, before the ng module declaration, we can just go ahead and we can get this in here, and this is coming from ngx-socket.io, and of course we just want to change to the endpoint to localhost 3000. That's where our server's running, and then where our imports are, this is where we can copy the SocketIO config, the SocketIO module with our SocketIO config. So let's just get that in there, and we'll probably just need to import that as well. So we have what we need on the front end. Let's go ahead and return to our back end, so we can set up the way we're handling the connections and sending messages and emitting that new message. So let's go to the chat gateway, and one thing we need to do here is, even though we've already dealt with cores, the WebSocket connection is sort of like it's running in the same application, but it's sort of treated as it's occurring separately to the API endpoints. So we also need to have a cores configuration for that. So we can just do that quite easily by having cores here and the website address. So in our case, this is just going to be a local address. So actually this is going to be http://localhost, and we're using Ionic, so make sure you do 8100 instead of 4200 for Angular. And that will allow the connection between the front end and the back end without any cause issues. So we've got that. Now we want to implement two interfaces or classes. Not really sure what they are. We need to implement the on gateway connection and also the on gateway disconnect, and this requires us, so the interfaces, but it requires us to have a couple of functions here. These are just sort of like equivalent to lifecycle methods or something like that. We want to notify the user when they've connected or disconnected. So let's just go ahead and write that out. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this one here for now, just for the moment. So we can start to, what we need to do first of all is have an annotation here, and it's going to say WebSocket server, and that's coming from the NestJS WebSockets package. And this annotation just allows us to state or have our server, so we can reference the server, so we can emit events from the server, because WebSocket connection is essentially server to client. Obviously you're making a request from the client, but then you're pushing something from the server to the client, sort of thing. So we're going to have a server type here, and this is going to come from the SocketIO package. And we'll use that in just a moment. But because we've implemented these two interfaces, we're going to need to actually have the method. So there's handle connection, and what this will do is, for now, we'll just do a console log saying connection made. And we've also got another method here called handle disconnect, and we'll just do another console log here saying disconnected. So we have the handle connection and the handle disconnect. We'll be using these later on. Eventually we're going to add some different rooms, so different connections or friends on LinkedIn can talk to one another, and we're going to make some more updates like that. So we're going to need to, have the connection and the disconnection, because obviously we don't want to have all these rooms open and wasting server resources. We only want to create the WebSocket connection if the particular connection is to be made, as in the user is wanting to talk to another person. So that's where we'll start to handle some of those. But we'll also have this method where it can actually emit events from the server. So to do that, we need this special annotation, which is the subscribe message annotation, and we need to give it a name. So that means when we call it from the front end, it will reference this. It's very similar to an API call. Just WebSocket essentially just builds up on the HTTP protocol. So we can just go ahead and call this one send message, and the actual function we'll just call this handle message, and this will take a socket. So it's going to take the actual the WebSocket, as in the socket connection between the client and the server, and that's from SocketIO. And then we also want the message that we're expecting. So what we're thinking here is we're going to send a message from the client. We're going to send it here, and then it will be able to handle that socket connection and it can essentially emit a message. So what we can do is we can say this.server. That's why we had this server here. So from the server, we're able to emit, and we're actually going to emit when we emit something. So we can send messages from the client, but we also want to update the client with all of the new messages. So I'm going to have this emit new message, and that's just going to be nothing more than the message that we've previously sent from the client. So there's two different events occurring here, the sending and the receiving of the message. So with that, that's more or less everything we need on the back end. So now we can actually go ahead and just return to our front end, and recall that we've made the, now let me just close a few things up here. So recall in the front end, we have our chat service here. So this is where we're going to interact, just like in the HTTP case, where we're going to interact with our server and our WebSocket connection to the server. So basically for this, we're just going to need to inject socket, and this is coming from ngxsocket.io, and this is going to allow us to have a couple of able to emit events. So when we send a message, what we want to do is obviously we're going to receive a message from the front end, and we'll put this in the component in just a moment. But we don't really need anything back just when we send the message, not straight away at least. But what we want to do is we want to, for the particular socket and the socket connection to the server, we want to go ahead and we want to emit, and we want to emit this send message event here. So we can go ahead and send the message, and that's expecting the message, and that's pretty much all we need here, because that will handle so then the server will emit its own event here. So we need to be able to handle that case as well, and we're subscribing to that on the front end in the component, so we're going to be aware of those changes and that observable stream there. So we can just have this here, get new message, and we would expect an observable back from RxJS, and we're just expecting the string. We might refactor this to a particular type later on, but let's just keep it simple for now. And we can just go ahead, and this time we're going to have to return the message because we accessed the socket, and now we're expecting something from the event. So the difference is, in the first case, we're emitting the message from the client to the back end. So from the front end, we're going to send the message to the back end, and then the back end is going to handle that. It's going to receive that send message, and it's going to handle it, and it's going to emit something back from the server back to the client, and we need to detect that new message. So that event's been emitted from the server in this case, so that's why we're going to have this from event, and this is just going to be of the type string, and it's going to be that new message. So because we're emitting that new message, it's going to come back with the message. So we've got the methods set up. Now we're going to need to use the methods. So let's go ahead and do that. let's open up our chat component, and we're going to need some sort of form to be able to submit the text that we're thinking of sending. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to come back in the next video and extend this, but really I just wanted to establish the connection between the two, the server and the client. But let's just go ahead and make this p tag a div here for now. And what we're going to do is let's just have a span, and we'll just say chat room, or chat room, and then we're going to have this p tag, and this is where we're going to have our messages. So in the chat component in the TypeScript file, we're going to have, well, we're going to have the new message, which is an observable of the string type. That's what we're getting back from get new message, that observable of the string type. So when we use that and consume that service method, we'll be able to use it here. And basically we can set up the subscription in the ng on init. So we can just say let's see, now you wouldn't normally want to return from the ng on init, but we'll just make a note here because we're going to change this very shortly. Refactor unsubscribe. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use that chat service, so we're going to need that so we can get the private chat service of the type chat service, and then we can access the methods on the chat service that we just created. So we want to get the new message, and we want to go ahead and subscribe to that, and then for the message that we're going to get of the type string, what we can do is we can just say, we can have a variable here, messages, and this can be a string array, and we'll set that equal to an empty array. So obviously we're going to need to persist this to data, persist this data to the database, but right now we'll just do it in memory. And then in the next video we'll come back to persisting it to the database for the previous messages, and then also combining that with the new messages, and then also having the rooms, and then also we'll have the update the UI so it looks a lot cleaner. But we need to get this initial boilerplate working here. So this is where we can just say this.messages .push, and we can push that new message here, and we can save that. So that means, you know, we'll have our messages here. So that means when we return back to our chat component, we can actually have an ng4 here. So ng4, and we can let message of messages, and then we have our singular message output in the p tag there, and then we're going to have a form, and we don't want this action, but we do want to give it a template variable, and we'll give it equal to form. But we're going to have to make this an ng form because we're going to want to have the, you know, so like a template driven form. So we can call this ng submit method and then access the form in the TypeScript, and we can just say on submit. Now this doesn't exist just yet, but let's just get the boilerplate of that on submit function. and we'll just put that right below the ng on init here, and we'll come back to our form. So inside of our form we can just have an ion item here, and inside, so I just need to get emit, press tab, and inside the ion item, I use the ion item so we can have our ion input laid out nicely. And this needs to have the ng model property on it, and the type of the input is just going to be text, and this is where we give the input a name, so we'll just call it message, and we'll just make this required. And that means since it's required, below our ion item here we can have an ion button, and we'll just say send message, and we can just say disabled in the event that our form is not valid. It's going to have a type of submit, so the ng on submit we'll be able to detect that, and it's also going to be able to detect this required field for the message to see if it's valid or not. Basically it just needs to be any string, just not empty. And let's just give it a shape of round and expand of block, and we're going to come back to the UI later on, but I just need something that's not completely horrible. So let's just come to the chat component now. So what we want to do here is on submit, we need to view the form, so that template variable we set. So let's do that, and for that we're going to need to import the view child function here for the form, and we'll just call it form in the TypeScript, which is of the type ng form, so we got to get that in as well. Now this is where we can say for our on submit. Now we know we're going to have on the form value, we're going to have the message field, so we can actually use some object destructuring to set the message variable equal to this .form.value, so we can get access to that value. And essentially if there's no message, so if it's blank, return, so it should be disabled, but we'll just have that safety in the function as well. What we want to do is we just want to say this chat service, we can send the message, and we can just pass in the message here. And we can also just run this form.reset. So I'm just going to run an Ionic serve here. And let's see if anything's broken. So on the left screen here, I'm logged in as John at hotmail.com, and here I'm going to log in as John2 at hotmail.com. Sign in, and I'm just going to click on messaging here, and if I just type in hey here, hi, how are you doing, we can see that the chat application is working more or less. But if I refresh the page, we see that we actually lose that information. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to persist the data to storage, and we'll be able to get that data so you can see the history of the chat, and we're going to append the new messages to that. We're also going to set up rooms, so you have your friend connections, or the people you're friends with, and you can select your connection and talk to them and create a new room and start a connection between the server and the client for the WebSocket, or the WebSocket connection. And we're going to update the UI, so we're going to have the image of who it is, and things will just look a lot cleaner. But I hope you enjoyed that video. It's the beginnings of the WebSocket connection and the ability to chat, so adding chat in your application. And in the next video we're going to extend this functionality. So thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.